We are expecting. Okay, just to remind everyone, we do record the workshops and they are hosted on the San Carlos website. So you'll be able to review them. For anyone who comes in late, they'll be able to catch up on some of the information that has been shared. So we'll be starting in just a few minutes. We're waiting for a few more people to log on. Okay, we appreciate everyone's promptness. We are waiting for a few more people to log on, but I want to respect your time, and we appreciate those of you who were early or right on time at 6 o'clock. So in just another minute, we'll be starting shortly. Okay, well, how about if we get started? My name is Joan Chaplick. I work with MIG. I'm part of the consulting team that is helping with the planning process for the housing element. I will be serving as the facilitator and moderator for our Zoom tonight. I'm also being assisted by Jesse Hernandez and Joey Nielsen. So we're the web team that will be assisting you and sharing information and also managing the feedback because we'll be having some interaction during this workshop. So to get us started, I would like to introduce Lisa Porras with the City of San Carlos to welcome everyone and start this evening's workshop. Lisa?
Great. Thank you so much, Joan, and thank you everyone for dedicating some of your evening tonight to be able to join us and talk about this important conversation. We're so glad that you're here tonight. We need your input. This is an important conversation to have. So just wanted to point out that I'm very glad to see all of you here. Hope you continue to stay involved in the process. So just once again, my name is Lisa Porras. I'm the planning manager for the City of San Carlos and the project manager working with the MIG consultant team on the housing element update and this focused update of our city's general plan. And before we get started, I would like to introduce our mayor. Mayor Laura Palmer Lohan is joining us this evening. And following the mayor's welcome, she will be turning it back over to me and I will be getting us started. Thank you. And so, Madam Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone to the third workshop of the San Carlos Housing Element Update. With limited choices for housing types across a range of prices, we face an unprecedented challenge to ensure that housing is available and inclusive to people of all incomes. Tonight's housing workshop will set in place a trajectory for how San Carlos can make it easy to build over 2,000 new homes over the next decade. Again, that number is, you'll learn more about it, but this is being something that's directed to us as a community to make sure we allow for that additional housing to be built in our community. We are all participants in this important conversation. We are given this opportunity to explore solutions and decide where new homes are preferred. We may find that certain areas in our city are more suited for taller, denser development, and other areas may not be. San Carlos and all other cities across California have been tasked with significantly higher housing targets than in prior housing element update cycles. We also know that California's lack of housing has prompted many new housing bills to be signed into law, and additional new housing bills continue to be proposed year after year. We believe that together we can choose housing solutions that are the right fit for our city. If we don't, rest assured that state legislators will continue to draft housing bills to address the shortfall and essentially choose for us. And these may not be what we want for our community. This is our chance to choose. So thank you for joining for tonight's workshop, and I hope you stay connected and continue to participate throughout the life of this project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So to give you an overview of what we're going to be doing tonight, we're just going to briefly touch point on what the housing element is and what the process is inclusive of. Similar to what our mayor just shared, this is essentially a state requirement and also a very much a need in our community to provide homes for people of across all income levels. We're going to want to hear from you about potential changes. What can the city do in order to meet its regional housing needs allocation? And so since this is the first time this acronym is appearing on the slide, I just want to pause for a moment just to make sure everyone can become familiar with this term. We often call it RHNA, RHNA, but this stands for the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And as we mentioned before in prior workshops, this is essentially a number that is assigned to every city and county across the entire state in terms of housing targets that it should strive for. And it's actually not just strive, but also meet through its regulations. So what can we do to the current regulations that we have on the books in order to make it easier to build new homes and to be able to meet our RHNA target? So we'd like to hear from you and get all of your feedback on the potential housing solutions. Next slide. To just sort of orient you to who we are, the San Carlos Project team, again, consists of myself, Lisa Porras, as well as our Community Development Director, Al Savay, and our Strategic Advisor from Good City Company, Erin Acknan. And then on the consultant side, I think you all have met Joan. She sort of kind of launched us into this meeting and welcomed us all, who will be our lead facilitator tonight, Joan Chaplick. And then joining Joan this evening is Lisa Brownfield, who is the project manager with MIG as well for this particular project. A couple of administrative housekeeping items. For those of you who may not be familiar, we have a project website where there's a lot of content available for this process, including prior recordings, chat transcripts, previous presentations for the prior two workshops that we've had. This meeting, again, is being recorded, and shortly after this workshop, we're going to be working to get it uploaded onto the project website so that anyone who might have missed this meeting or join us later can really watch the entire recording of this workshop. The project website also allows you to submit additional comments, so you're free to just hop on the website. If there's something that you think about or you really want to say or share or contribute, you can do that through the project website. And then if you haven't already, we'd like for you to sign up to receive automatic emails. So as we continue through this process, you can be updated along the way. We'll talk about it at the end of the meeting, but essentially this is a 2-year project, but we're already into that 2 years, and it will continue until the end of 2022. So if you haven't signed up already, please do so. Tell your neighbors and friends if they ask you about it. It's not too late to get involved. So I think that's it for my part, and I'm going to turn it back over to Joan.
Okay, so thanks, Lisa. So during our workshop, Lisa mentioned several times that we want your feedback, and we're going to be using some digital tools. We're going to be using a polling tool called Mentimeter, and it allows us to ask multiple choice questions, but it also provides the opportunity for open-ended questions so that we can get more complete comments. We'll be scrolling those comments so that there's transparency and you can hear and see some of the comments that are coming from other community members. We'll also, at various times, we will toggle the chat on so that we can take your questions. And we want to keep your questions focused on that particular part of the presentation. It'll help us manage the information and be more responsive. And then also, we have public comment at the end of the meeting. So if there's anyone who wants to share their comments verbally, each speaker can have up to 2 minutes at the end of the meeting. Just to remind you, the Zoom chat features. So when we ask for questions, it'll be toggled on. You'll see this little chat button and you can submit your question and they come to all the panelists, and we'll be trying to answer as many as we can, and those that will satisfy the largest information needs. When we get to the public comment period at the end of the meeting, you can raise your hand. There's the raise hand feature. You just click on that and I get a signal that you've raised your hand. I'll be calling on people. If for some reason you have trouble with the raise hand icon, you can submit your name through the chat. And just a reminder, we're going to be using Mentimeter Polling as our main tool for receiving comments. So, you know, chat is for questions. The Mentimeter Polling is for comments, and we'll be using this tool at various points. So we want everyone to take a moment, and there's 2 ways you can use Mentimeter. So you're on whether you're on your tablet, the link has gone out to all the panelists and attendees, so you can click on that link. It'll take you right to Mentimeter. You can toggle out, open a separate screen, put in menti.com and then the code, or using your phone with a QR code. Just scan it and that will take you right to Mentimeter. And also the web link and the code number are on every slide. So if for some reason you lose your place, you will have that information up on the screen with you whenever we're using Mentimeter. And Mentimeter, you know, one of the reasons we want to use it is that it allows us to display the results in real time for transparency, and to in this digital world, it's hard to see what others are thinking about or their opinions, and the Mentimeter polling tool will help us do that. So I hope I've given everyone enough time to get to Mentimeter. That is going to be our main tool for commenting today. So let's try it out with just a simple Mentimeter question. We're going to switch screens, and my colleague Joey is he's going to lead you with Mentimeter. And so as you can see, we've asked people, you know, what brings you joy? So right now, with everything going on, do you like spending time with your family or being outdoors, getting exercise, enjoying a book or movie, being with pets, or other? And if you look in this lower right-hand corner here, I'm seeing that I have 25 people who have responded so far. I know we have more than 25 attendees, we'll just pause a little bit and give people a chance to get to the menti.com and just punch in that code number so that they'll be able to participate in some of the other questions that are coming up. Okay, so Joey, let's go to our next question. And this is the 3rd time we're asking these same questions so that we can keep track of who is coming to these workshops. So if you could tell us how long you've lived in San Carlos. Are you new? Are you a newbie, less than a year? Have you been here between 1 and 4 years, 5 to 9, or more than 10? And we find this to be an interesting question to help us get a sense of if we have longtime residents. And let's see, so I have 24 people responding, and hopefully a few more of you will be able to weigh in. Okay, we got up to 25. We may have a few folks sitting out the polling. Okay, so we have a mix of participation, but it looks like we have more longer time residents here. Okay, Joey, would you take us to our next question? here we want to know, what's your housing situation? So are you a homeowner? Are you a renter? Do you live with family and friends? You don't own, you don't have to pay rent, or do you currently not have a permanent home? And we try to have we try and see what mix of housing situations we can have in the room. So we have about 23 people responding. Okay, so we're up to 25. Okay, let's go to our third and final question. What's your age? So again, it's anonymous, but we just like to get get what the age spread is in terms of newer residents, and then diversity of ages across the board in terms of participation. So just a few more folks, if you could weigh in. And again, we find this to be helpful information in terms of how successful our outreach is. And every now and then we try different things to see if we can attract different segments of the population in the city. Okay, so with that, we have 27 people, so we have a few more people weighing in. And I think with that, we're going to go back to the PowerPoint and go past our questions here. And with that, so we will be using Mentimeter again later in the workshop. And at this point, I now want to introduce my colleague, Lisa Brownfield. She's the project manager for the MIG team, and she's going to give us a recap of what's happening with the planning process today. Lisa? And you're on mute.
Hi,
There you go.
thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for participating. Let's talk really brief about the housing element update and what a housing element is. As you know, a housing element sets policy as to how a jurisdiction or a city, next slide please, how a jurisdiction or city will accommodate current and future residents and their housing needs, looking at a diversity of housing types and a diversity of housing costs. By law, we're required to update the housing element every 8 years. And so the cycle that we're currently planning for is the years 2023 to 2031. And as we said before, we need to adopt the housing element by January 2023. Next slide. So we've talked to you, the community, before, and let's talk a little bit about what we've heard. So we've had 2 workshops and a survey. The first workshop and the first survey, we really heard about key issues and concerns that the community had about housing and other topics. The second workshop, we focus on getting feedback about the housing types and the general locations of housing in which perhaps we can direct the housing to in the future. We also had a stakeholder outreach with the East San Carlos neighborhood, and part of the reason why we had this community discussion with them is that there is the East San Carlos visioning process going on, and so we wanted to tap in to that process a little bit and have both planning processes be similar and talking to some of the same points. And also we had a couple of times that we've touched base with the City Council's Housing Subcommittee, and we'll continue to have kind of touching bases and quick meetings with the Housing Subcommittee as we move through the process. Next slide. Let's also talk about what else, other factors that we know about. Go ahead. So in the past, San Carlos has seen new development that developed that looks like the Trussell's apartments. They're about 200 units. It's about 30 DUs per the acre, or DUs is dwelling units or homes, 30 homes per acre. In this case, it was 3 stories, and they have surface parking lot. But the problem is that even if the city continues to have this type of development and it occurs throughout the city, it's not going to be enough for this next housing cycle. The RHNA is about 3 times as high as previous RHNAs. And so we're going to need to change the way we think a little bit, and we're here now to think about those options of what we should be exploring. Next slide. So kind of the idea is like really what one of our first questions is what can be achieved with the current regulations. Next slide. So over the what we have found is that with the current zoning, you're going to get approximately 1,200 to 2,200 new residential units. However, we know that the RENA, when this is a draft number, it's recently published again, but it won't be final until the fall. Excuse me, fall. So it won't be final until the end of the year. So, and that number is approximately 2,700. So at this point, we already know that the current zoning is not going to allow enough units to be built over that next 8-year period. In addition to that, we also need to think about having a buffer. And the reason why we need to have a buffer is because not all the projects are going to be developed at the maximum rate, the maximum number of units they can be. There's going to be a number of them that come in less than that. And as a result of that, we need to have some additional sites or additional units kind of like in our back pocket, so that when new units are being, or new projects are being built, if they aren't up to their maximum, there's additional capacity elsewhere. And that's that buffer. So if you add the RENA plus the buffer, we have a need for about 3,300 units. Therefore, we're going to have a shortfall of about 1,000 to 2,000 units just based on current zoning. So that's a pretty large gap, as you can probably are all thinking. And here's a couple of reasons why. One of the reasons is that we're still waiting for some specific information from the state. When we looked at the existing zoning and the RENA itself, we make a lot of different assumptions. And some of these assumptions need to be tighter, and it's a result of additional information. And one of the things that we're waiting for is from the state is how to count ADUs in the future as we go ahead. Next slide.
Would you tell us what an ADU is, Lisa?
Oh, thank you. ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. They used to be known as granny flats or secondary units. They can be built attached or detached to a home. It could be above a garage. It can be in the backyard. It could be any sort of location within the city for the most part, and on the lot. So one of the next questions that we thought about is, are the current regulations working? And what we found is that they're somewhat working. Since the mixed use and the multifamily zoning was adopted in 2011, there's been some new units developed. There's been about approximately 575 new units constructed. And of those, about 50 of them are below market rate. So the city's doing really quite well on making their targets for the creating the number of units overall for this cycle that we're currently in. However, like many other jurisdictions across the state, they're falling. The San Carlos is falling short on the number of units that are below market rate. And some of the reasons why the projects are falling short a little bit one is that they are the majority of condos, so we're falling behind a little bit on the rental units, which plays into the diversity and housing costs. And most of the units have been larger units. And so while the buildings are being built and the housing is being constructed, they're not being constructed at their upper limits of their density and intensity. And they're all kind of being constructed into certain unit types, and we're missing some of the diversity that the RENA is dependent upon. So we've also then, that was kind of like the first test, is how well do the regulations work? And we looked at what has happened in the recent past. We also then talked to developers, both for-profit and nonprofit developers, about what would induce or entice more building to occur and more housing to occur in San Carlos. And we did a comparison with other jurisdictions and other cities in the Bay Area, as well as some of the other communities throughout California. And through that discussion, we really heard that the city might want to think about considering changing the height limits that are currently exist in the zoning, changing the density, and modifying some other regulations, possibly like open space and parking, and a few other regulations that kind of that inform how a housing is currently built. Next slide. So one of the things that we're going to think about is what can be achieved in when a particular regulations are modified, and that's kind of the discussion that we're going to be having tonight. Next slide, please. Is what are some of the tools can we use to adjust our thinking, and how does that impact housing development? We're going to tonight really look at two areas that have been historically sensitive, and those are housing adjacent to single-family neighborhoods and new housing adjacent to industrial uses. Next slide. And I will now going to introduce Al Savay, who is going to talk to you a little about some potential zoning modifications.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And again, I'm Al Savay. I'm the Community Development Director with the City of San Carlos. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some case studies that we did on these sensitive areas where you have a juxtaposition between single-family residential and multifamily residential. And we're also going to talk about the consideration of mixed-use zoning along Terminal Way on the east side of San Carlos, as we've heard from some of the residents there that they would like to have a buffer between their single-family residential homes and industrial commercial development there. We'll review some visualizations and some diagrams, and we'll get into some details there. And we'll ask for your comments on some of those. And we'll try and engage your support for some ideas. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, there are some constraints to get how.
And so Al, it looks like Al has frozen up a little
on
bit.
a particular lot, and we'll talk about. I'll walk you. Am I still frozen? Am I good now?
If you could go back two or three sentences, you froze up there for a bit.
And sorry about that. I may have to switch switch over to a different network. So if that happens again, I may do that, folks. But anyway, I'll continue. So going back a step, we're going to talk about different options. What kinds of things, characteristics for construction development affect how many units you can get on a particular lot. And what we've heard, I think, over the years is that we do want to find a way as a community to make a home for our firefighters, our teachers, service workers, and others, and young families. But we also have to recognize that we have to do this within these RHNA numbers, the regional housing needs numbers that we've been given. And so we won't be able to do this without you and your guidance on this. As we're bringing you along in this process with us, and we're in this together. So we will be talking to you about these ideas. Go ahead, James. Thank you. So in terms of what we did is a while back, in fact, a year or two ago, we started thinking about as we saw new development come in, particularly along Laurel Street and in the downtown area, we asked an architect and urban designer to help us understand what are some of the things that limit housing development, and what are some of the triggers that pose a challenge in terms of getting more units on a particular lot. And that being said, and as planners, we had some ideas about this, but also we had been hearing from the community in community meetings that there's a concern with regard to height and massing and intensity of development, and how do we fit these buildings into the fabric and character of San Carlos and in our downtown. And, how are we going to be sensitive, particularly in these areas where you have single family to multiple family development like condos and apartments. So we worked with this architect designer to look at some things, and we're going to talk about that now. Okay. So what we did is there's a zone, and I'll show you where it is in just a moment, but it's called the mixed use neighborhood zone. And the reason it's called that is because, again, it's in that juxtaposition area, and we have several areas of our community where we have mixed use apartments right next to single family neighborhoods. And our current laws allow for certain number of units to be developed based on a lot size, right? In these areas. And historically, the city, and as have many cities in the Bay Area and in the region, we have put a cap on the number of units per acre that you can develop. And so what you see there in green, for instance, like where it says 20 DU/AC, that means 20 dwelling units per acre. And cities, what they do is they say you can only develop up to this point, and you can't go, over 20 dwelling units for an acre. And so that limits the number of units you can get on any size lot that you have. So for this area, and I'll show you on a map in just a moment, our limit is 20 units to the acre. Next, please. So this is an area that we studied in, and this is the area along Laurel Street between Laurel and Walnut in that magenta area that you see there. And it's an area bounded by Arroyo, and it goes all the way down Laurel until you get to Eaton. And it's actually, there's a north area in our community north of Holly that has the same zoning, and we have it on East San Carlos Avenue in the greater East San Carlos neighborhood. And you see those two numbers on the screen there, those are the two case study locations. And so we're going to look at a couple of different sites, and we're going to show you what happened based on different scenarios. Next, please. So the first thing we did is we looked at, well, what's the current zoning? And what would it look like if you built out to the maximum of the current zoning? And so what you see on your screen there is 910 Laurel, and that's near Gracie's Deli, as you can see, where the former deli there. And that white building is the study building there. And just down the street, that's the 900 block of Laurel. You see a development there, and that's 3 stories. And it was kept at 3 stories. And we've been talking to the developers as they come in along that side of Laurel. And even though the zoning allows for 4 stories, what we've been saying is we prefer that you have it at 3 stories to respect the height in the residential neighborhood next door. And they've been accommodating that over the years. But the issue there is that, that building there, it's what we call multifamily. There's several units, and there's a little ground floor retail there. But that's only 3 units. There's 3 units in that building. And on the left-hand side of the screen there, you see that's taking a bird's eye view at this case study site. And you see the green area at the rear, and that is the setback for the backyard of this project site. And then you see 2 single-family homes up to this site. And at the front is Laurel. And the white area that you see there is the building. Next, please. And so what we did here is we took a section through the cake, right? We cut the cake, and we looked at it from the side, see what this would look like in this view. And at the left-hand side of the screen, you see Laurel St, and then you see our case study building at 20 acre. And the current zoning would allow for a 4-story building in 4 stories. And on the far right-hand side of the screen, you see a single-family residence right there. And the maximum height for a 2-story home is 28 feet. And there's a 15-foot setback for that house. And then you see there's a 30-foot setback for this test have here. And that's what the zoning says. And it also says that the farther away, you need to get farther away from that property line in the house to go higher. So that's why you see the wedding cake design as it goes up toward Laurel. And so you get 4 stories. And in this one, we have 2 units. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So that's at 20 units to the acre. Now, just units to the acre more, what happens? So we're able to, 30 to the acre at 3 stories, but we get 3 units. We found out that we get another, just like the one down the street, by staying at 3 stories. Well, how do we do that? And it's actually a fairly significant amount of commercial space at the ground floor, as you can see, 3,000 square feet. Same size of lot and everything. Let's go to the next slide. And then here's your section. And the way this was able to occur was lessening pushing that 3rd story up toward the front near Laurel Street and maintaining a setback at the rear. It's 5 feet less than before, but we're able to maintain a 2-story building there, just like if it was a 2-story house. So it's no more 25 feet high, let's say, in a couple of stories, but we're able to move that other unit up toward the street and get another. Next, please. And we're just going to continue to kind of go up here. And here's at 40 units, we're going to get 4 units this development project. And let's go to this slide. And we do it again by maintaining that 25 feet at the rear. You can see the 3rd floor gets a little bit bigger with that extra unit, but we're still able to maintain those 2 floors and just stay at 3 and still get 4 units. So how does all this work together? Let's do one more. This is 50 dwelling units to the acre, 910 Laurel, and we're getting 5 units in 3 stories. We got less commercial in this one, and we have same lot. Next, please. And by we're going to be able to questions after this. We'll take your input after this, and you'll be able to comment and get details on this as we go forward. But I just want to kind of walk you through these different ideas. And then this one is at 50 units to the acre. You can see the top floor is a little bit larger. We've reduced the commercial footage, and the units have gotten smaller. And that's another way that we were able to get a few more units in the same mass and reduce the commercial square footage, but still maintain that setback and the slow progression from the single family up. Next.
Okay, and we have, there will be time for questions. So Al's just going to finish getting through this, this summary of this material, and then we'll be taking questions through the chat so that we can hear from you. And if there are people having difficulties, we can also use the raise hand. So just wanted to call that out. And Al's going to summarize and walk us through this.
So I know this is a lot of detail, but this is kind of this is how we are going to have to go through this, because when we talk to contractors and developers, they come to us and they say, well, we can or we can't do something, right? I mean, either it's feasible or it's infeasible. And we have to work with the marketplace to come up with standards that are feasible to actually get built, but also be sensitive to our community and what's around these development projects. So this is how we're looking at it. And so what we find, if you look at this chart, on the far left, you see existing MUNA, that column there. That's that 2 units. We get 2 units at 20 units to the acre, 4 cars, and we have a 1,650 square foot unit size. Those good size units there. And the next one, we go up 10 units to the acre. You get 3 units. And so what is changing there? The unit size goes down a little bit and less commercial. In scenario C, let me see here, I lost my view, there we go. How did I do that? Gallery. Sorry, excuse me for one moment. I lost my picture of the presentation.
Yeah,
There
Al,
it is.
yeah, and that was me. My apologies. I was
Okay,
trying to find
all
the
right, I thought
chat
it was
and
me
I
for a
stopped
second.
sharing. So
All
that's
right.
my bad. Go ahead.
Good. Okay. So there you have numbers, or C, 40 units to the acre. So changes, we can see the commercial is about the same, but the open space requirement now reduces a little bit. And you still have 3 stories, 34 feet, and 4 cars, but the unit size gets smaller. And in the scenario at 50 dwelling units to the acre, we go down in parking a little bit, and you still have the same size of units. So this is a lot of detail, but what essentially this is showing is that you can generate more housing, and on these sensitive, smaller sites that, like this, we can do it with less building area and building mass and height. And these are the things, we have heard, people are concerned about the number of housing units, sure, but also people are really concerned about privacy and views and, solar access and things like that. Next, please. We wanted to walk you through one more. And this is at 1100 Laurel Street, at the corner of Laurel and Britton. And this is a larger site, and it's a wider site at the corner there. And this is probably more applicable to many other areas of the community and in even some other mixed-use zones that we have in San Carlos. And so under the 20 units to the acre, we're able to get 11 units with 6,000 square feet of commercial space. That's a lot of commercial space at the ground floor. Next, please. And as we go up, go ahead. And as we look at that, let's go back really quick and look at that section again. And so how does this look if you cut slice it in half? You see those 4 stories there in 50 feet. You do have to set it back, as you go higher, you set it back away from the single family residential. But that's units there. Next, please. And this is a 3-story building, but we're able to get 17 units. So another 6 units, same amount of commercial space. How are we able to do that in 3 stories? Next. You want to go to 40? We can just keep.
Oh, yeah, there's 30.
So how do we do? We can still maintain that big setback at the rear and get that. We've reduced our square foot commercial, and it looks like we've reduced the unit size a bit. Next. And then at 40 dwelling units to the acre, we're still able to maintain 3 stories at 23 units. We're now reducing, we're eating into that commercial space, and we're just adding residential in there. And next, please. And still able to maintain the 3 stories, fairly substantial setback at the rear. We scooted out toward the back of the lot there, but only 2 stories. Next. And this is 50 dwelling units to the acre, which is essentially the same as what we have now along El Camino and in a lot of the down area. At 3 stories, we're able to get 28 units with no commercial. And you can see what it looks like here in the section view. Looks about the same as the last scenario, but we've eliminated the commercial. The unit size has been reduced a little bit, and that's how we were able to add a few more units. Next, please. And so this shows you kind of how this scenario works. The next slide will show you, again, those different scenarios as they compare in numbers of units and density. And you can see number of units, it goes up. The maximum building height goes down to 34 feet. How are we able to do that? And is it real? Well, each floor is 9 feet. So that's comfortable for a house or living unit. And that's 2 feet of between, and it is a flat roof. And you see the parking spaces, we're able to maintain the parking ratio generally. And then the unit size gets a little smaller as we go. And what we've been finding, and I think Lisa mentioned it earlier, is that under the current scenario, developers are actually building less units, but bigger units for a number of different reasons. So I think what this shows us is that from a zoning standpoint and a technical standpoint, there is a way to get more dwelling units in with lower, but more by just changing an artificial number like density and raising that up. It makes it more economically feasible to do these projects if you allow for more flexibility in your density. But we're also then able to maintain a lower height. We may need to look at things like open space a little bit, see if we're, do we need to reduce a little bit of the on-site open space? We may need to make some adjustments in parking as well. And so that concludes this section. And I think we're going to open it up right now, Joan, to
Yes.
some questions.
Yes. So, so what we're seeking, we are going to take comments and ask your opinion about the different scenarios. So we're seeking questions. I know Al just gave you a lot of information, and he's just trying to demonstrate a series of scenarios that with some incremental changes, the city can incrementally increase the number of units that can be constructed or that can be planned for. So I have a couple of hands up, and then we'll also take questions through the chat. So please, if you could stay focused on questions. I'll call your name. I have a couple of people I can take you off of mute, and you'll be able to speak to the group. And my co-hosts, Jesse and Joey, are going to make it possible for you to unmute yourself and ask your question. So I have Dimitri as the first question.
Yeah, hi. Just a quick question. This is a 1 hour meeting, is this correct?
No, it's 2. It's 2. It was 6 to 8.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, yeah. So, I'm just noticing a big delta in previous meetings where there was community input to this one where, there's been a lot of presentation and not the ability to provide feedback. So I'm a little disappointed there. So that's just a comment. Regarding Al, the scenarios that you've presented, what I'm trying to understand the delta here. I mean, to me, I look at this and I just go, well, you're cutting the commercial square feet in order to get some more units, and then by increasing the number of units per acre, you're just building more smaller units in the same lot size, right? That's the gist of what you're trying to present is if we increase the number of units, we can lower the square footage of them and actually get more housing in the same amount of space. Is that a good way to encapsulate what you were presenting?
Yeah, I think you're generally right. I mean, that's the takeaway. And there's a bunch of different ways. I mean, you know, this is one combination of those things, but I think the big thing is that density, meaning the number of units per acre, you know, we have, and every city has done this in their general plan, is they've said this is the maximum. And the maximum that we have at 20 units to the acre, you know, for instance, in this area, that alone limits is a very hard limit for the number of housing units. And what we are also trying to show is, yeah, you can move, like you said, you know, you can move numbers around, make smaller units. You're right, Dimitri. But also what we wanted to show is, and what we've heard for years, is that people are concerned about the mass of some of these buildings, in particular, when they're next to single family residential neighborhoods. And that's the specific takeaway from this tonight.
Okay, and then Al, just one quick follow up there. So is the proposal to increase the number of units per acre, but then decrease the height of the buildings and or increase open space on the lot itself? I mean, what are the parameters, right? Because it feels to me that what you're saying is the existing zoning is almost dictates, you know, the largest units possible with the, you know, fewest amount of actual families being able to be in the unit. But what is it that we get for folks who are on boundaries where they might have a single family home and then a multi-dwelling buildings built? Are there specifics in the zoning that say this amount of open space, this height limit, et cetera, in addition to increasing the number of units?
Yeah, so tonight we're not telling the community we're not making recommendations tonight. We're just kind of sharing information, kind of like enlightenment. I mean, we were enlightened by this. I mean, you know, to say that I could have a lower building but get more units was you know, catharsis, right? I mean, it's like, really? And so you're right that there are specific details about each of these things. And you can see under that column A, those are our limitations. Those are our reasons for things like open space. You have to have a minimum amount of open space. You have to, or a maximum number of stories or a maximum. So we have all those numbers, yeah. And your other question was, what does the person next door get? Is that what is that you said? What does the single family resident get? Is that what you're referring to? If you could just clarify that.
Yeah. What basically, you know, the concern, right? The community concern is reducing the impact on single family neighborhoods, and I think, you know, we've been very consistent about that. You know, from the East Side Neighborhood Association has been very consistent about that. So, you know, I'm happy to see that there's some thought being placed there. But yeah, what you know, what we don't want is maximum coverage of a lot, and then you know, really changing the character of the community. So I mean, I think there are some interesting things here.
Okay.
You know, option B looks kind of.
So Dimitri,
yeah.
we're going to get comments on the scenarios. We have a number of hands up and a number of questions in the chat. So I'm going to try and have us be a little bit more brief, and we'll be able to hear from more people. And then we are going to quickly go through each of the scenarios, and you'll be able to share your comments then.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about podium parking. So we sent the answer out through the chat. So you should be able to, that had been explained. So the next raised hand, we have Debbie. I don't have a last name. So Debbie, if you could take yourself off mute.
Hi, Joan, and thank you, Al, for that presentation. It's very interesting and very positive. But I do have a question about the open space. Could you explain the differences, how the open space changes from 4,000 in the scenario A and then decreases to 2,800 in B and then goes up to 6,300 when it's 50 units? I don't understand that. If you could help fill us in on that.
So there's different trade-offs there. If you kind of follow the numbers, and they're kind of all over the place, and you have to look in there. But for instance, if you reduce the amount of commercial space, you might give that, most of it to a residential unit, but you could then transfer some of that square footage over to open space. And so there's kind of like, it's a balancing act. You can move those numbers around as long as, and the way that our zoning code works and most others is, we require a certain for each unit, for instance, right? So and in this case, we're saying overall square feet for San Carlos requirements is only 4,000. And so in scenario B, that's below the city's requirement. So what we would have to do to accommodate that, for instance, is say, we're okay with only 3,000, or I'm sorry, 25 or 2,800, square feet of open space. So it's kind of a push-pull on each of these numbers. But as long as, from a zoning standpoint, as long as you conform to the city's requirement on each of these areas, you can move those numbers around within our requirements. So that's how I don't want to get too into the details of that. I hope I answered your question. Let me know if you need more clarification.
Okay.
Thank you, Al. It's a little confusing, but I'm sure it'll be worked out later. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I have a question in the chat. Are there currently requirements around the ratio of commercial space to the overall building size?
Are there requirements?
Yes.
No.
Ratio of.
No, we don't require commercial space. You can do it if you want. Mm-hmm. So no, you don't have to do that.
Okay. So then the next hand I have up is for M. It's either Yurka or Jerka. If you want to take yourself off mute, and you should be able to speak.
Oh, hi,
okay.
This is Brittany Baxter. So maybe
okay, go ahead.
Messed up. But thank you. So yeah, really interesting presentation there with kind of how the numbers can work out. That was something I'd been wondering about too, because I know we haven't met our, arena targets for especially the low income housing, and being familiar with some of the costs of development, I figured the height limits were kind of what was holding us back there. So it's great to see this analysis and see a little more consideration of that. My question was if we're open to considering going higher. I think, just like Al mentioned, it is that trade-off, right? You can cover the entire ground in 1 or 2 story units, or you can put a couple taller buildings in place and preserve that green space elsewhere. Certainly we all love that here in town. I also wanted to ask if the city is kind of considering the mix of type of units that we have. So we talked about, obviously, if the units are smaller, you can put more in the building, vice versa. I've heard that comment there that there's some concerns about the mass of the building, but I'm a single family homeowner here, and I'm also very concerned about our city's ability to attract and retain talent and essential staff. I think a lot of people that work here have families, and those larger units would really be an asset to our town. So just asking if we're considering a bit more larger units and a bit taller buildings as well.
So, thank you for the question and comment. And you're right. The taller building, we looked at density as sort of the key number here. But of course, the higher building, the more units you can get in that building. And so the big question is, and what we heard at the last community meeting is, some folks in the community would like to, are okay maybe seeing taller buildings in certain areas of the city and not others. And we're trying to kind of figure out, well, what, acceptable, for people. So you're right, the higher the building, the more units you're going to get along with that density. And in terms of mix of units, the city doesn't say you have to have, this many 1 bedrooms or this many 2 bedrooms or 3. That's really marketed, and the developers kind of have their ways of figuring out what's going to be best for their particular type of project, whether it's commercial, it's an apartment or a condominium.
Okay, thanks, Al. Let's see, we have M. Yurka, your hand is back up, and I think you had fallen out of the queue. So we want to give you a chance to ask your question.
Hi, yeah, Michael Yurka, you got it right, thanks. So I have a question. I actually checked on the map, and I think one of my assumptions was wrong, but I just wanted to ask about lots that are not adjacent to single family housing. And I checked 1100 is adjacent, but there's many nice parcels kind of between El Camino and Laurel that are not. Is there a height limit, and why not go for 4, 6, 8, 20 stories? And I know, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Burlingame have a lot of really nice examples of apartment buildings of that size close to their really beautiful, cozy downtowns. So I guess my question is about a very high height limit for lots that are not immediately adjacent to single family housing, whether that's allowable, and also just, signaling that that would be my preference, just to allow more housing.
And also, Al, we have Jody Gerhardt has a question or a comment about, a 55-foot height limit. And so, there's a couple of comments in there about, if we're zoned for 4 stories, why is it a problem? And I think to follow up on Michael's comment about thinking about even taller buildings.
And so we do have maximum heights in San Carlos based on kind of where the land is. Along El Camino, it's 50 feet. And I think we go up to 59 feet along East San Carlos Avenue, and that's the maximum. And really what we found, and what the developers will tell you and the contractors, is you can only get 4 stories in 50 feet. That's you can build. And some communities have said, okay, along major thoroughfares like El Camino Real and other peninsula, we're okay with going a little higher, as that's the appropriate location, closer to transit, closer to their train stations or their bus lines. So yes, other communities throughout the Bay Area and in the peninsula have looked at the heights and gone higher in certain locations, and so that's what we're looking at with this general plan, is where is it appropriate in our community. If people are open to it, we need to know where those areas are.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to the next hand raised we have is David Crabb. And David, you should be able to go ahead.
Hello, Al. Yeah, just curious, we're talking about only density in this particular issue, but the question that we had initially was the options were changing parking, changing open space, changing dwelling units per acre, which is a density question, or changing height. And you didn't talk much about parking. You didn't actually talk a lot about open space. Height was clearly part of your concern. Parking especially seems to be an issue. Any developer will tell you the cost of every parking stall reduces the amount of money they can invest in the building. And if you take 2 parking stalls out of a project, you can get one bedroom unit in there. And so reducing the parking would be really big. You were using 1.5 cars per unit in a place that's a transit oriented downtown space, and 1.0 would certainly be closer. So Could you address the parking issue more clearly? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. I love talking about parking. So parking is really, really interesting, and it's probably one of the most expensive parts of any development project for a lot of different reasons. A parking stall on a surface parking lot is a minimum of $50,000 per space. Structured parking can go, up to, 90,000, or, maybe somebody would tell me more in a structured building. So it's very, very expensive. It adds greatly to the cost of these projects. So over the years, what cities have been doing is reducing the requirements that the cities put on these developments. Historically, people have said, well, if you don't put enough parking in these apartment buildings and condos, they're going to park in my neighborhood. And that's why the cities have put such high ratios in their zoning codes over the years. For instance, a minimum of 2 parking spaces for each dwelling unit. For our mixed-use zones along El Camino, for a 2 or more, we require 1.5 units. You have to have a little guest parking and things like that. In big urban areas, you're looking at either 1 space or 0. And some cities in big metropolitan urban areas are saying you don't have to have what you want to do it. So the closer you get to transit, the less parking you really need. And there's lots of studies that show that that's why they call it transit oriented, and you'll hear that is because you're within walking distance to the train and the bus. So you're right. If we lowered our parking standard, it would be helpful to the cost of the project, and you might get more housing. But, and here's the caveat that I find quite interesting over the years is, we've said to developers, well, what if, we had 1 space per unit, and the city did that for the development community, and, we want to get more housing. And what they say is, well, that's great, but we're still going to build 1.5 or even 2 for a 3-bedroom unit because that we can't rent it for these high rents, or we can't sell it for what we want to sell it for. So it's really an interesting kind of balancing act there, David. Thank you for the question.
And
Well, I think, Al, that you just explained why they're only building large units and not small units on Laurel Street.
okay.
Well,
Thank
there's
you,
a number
David.
of different reasons for that. Yeah, we can talk about
Well,
that.
that cost thing, the cars are adding to the cost, and therefore
Yes.
the only way to make their money back is to do the large units. So the fact that we're requiring they're doing the more cars is actually pushing them toward bigger units, fewer units, which is contrary to trying to build affordable housing and more units than what we're aiming for.
And just to add, we have gone to mechanized parking. So we are seeing that there's a cost savings there if you stack the cars in those stackers. So that's one. We allow for tandem parking. So we're trying to work with all these different components of the parking code to make it easier to build.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
And Al, there had been a question about if mechanical parking and lifts were allowed, and you just answered that. So that had come in through the chat. I have another question from the chat. It has to do with the 72-foot height allowed on Walnut. The person thought you referenced a maximum height of 50 feet. So if you could please explain that.
Yes, I did. Thank you for bringing that up. So yes, you're right. There is a building that was recently approved right across from Wheeler Plaza on Walnut Street, where Jeffrey's used to be the jewelry, Jeffrey's Jewelry, right across the street there. And it is about 7 reason for that is the state of California, there's new legislation, and it's called a state density bonus. And what it says is that if you add more affordable housing units at certain levels of affordability, the city has to give you a concession for asking. And it could be an incentive or a concession of some kind, and it could be anything. So a lot of times what developers will do is build more units, the extra height under this thing called the state density bonus law. And so, even though we have 50 feet, if they provide certain extra below market rate units at certain levels of affordability, we have to give them the extra height. And that's what happened there.
Okay, thank you for that question. Al, back to the open space requirements. Can landscaping be required in the open space, or can it be parking? What does that include?
That's usually either private or public and open space, and it has to be open space. It's got to be either landscaping, or you have to have a bench or a plaza or a seating area. It depends on the type, but there's two types of open, private, and one's public in any given development, but it can't be parking.
Okay, thank you. And we have, I think the last hand we have raised is David Pollock.
Hi.
Go ahead, David.
Thank you. So my question is, if Laurel Street is zoned for 4 stories next to a Walnut Street, which is R1 zone single family homes, why is the Laurel Street zoning beholden to what neighbors on Walnut Street are wanting? If the zoning is the zoning, why does the neighboring zoning matter to the developer?
Path of least resistance. So what I mean by that is every developer, let's say you're doing one of these developments, almost all of them have to go through a design review process, or if they're asking for something where it requires review by the planning commission or the city council, they have to have a public engagement process for their development project. And some of them decide, I don't want to go through the headache of arguing with the neighbors about the 4th story. I'd rather do 3 stories. And I know that because I've talked to the neighbors, they would support my project at 3, and I'll get through in 6 to 9 months faster than if I went to the 4th story. So it's not the zoning, it's the reacting to processing time, and time is money.
Okay, and let's see, when you were explaining about the density bonus, should we compensate for the density bonus by reducing the height allowed so that when they get a bonus, we get the height we want?
Well, you're kind of artificially limiting the original density. So, I mean, you can, it's an interesting question, but you're artificially kind of limiting your initial zoning, and that's, you may be limiting the number of units. When we go to the state of California and say, here's our plan to meet our RENA requirements, if we lower the height, they're going to say you're being more restricted than you are now. And so they're not going to like that. And what they're going to say is, you have to find a place to put this housing somewhere else in your community. And so that's kind of a short answer, I think.
Okay, so thank you, Al. So we've been through all the raised hands. I think we have gotten a few comments on the format. There was a request kind of for some brainstorming and more participation, and we're going to be having that in just a moment. So we're going to move on to the next part of the meeting. And a few of you asked very specific questions about certain properties and such, and Lisa Porras and others from the planning staff helped to respond to those. So with that, we're going to go back to our where we were in the PowerPoint with our slideshow. We have our chart. And so we're going to ask you for your opinion on the different scenarios, and you'll see the Mentimeter questions come up in just a moment. And scenario A, which has the blue highlights, is what you currently have. So now we're going to ask you about B. And so as Al had explained, you know, the density goes up 10 units per acre. They're able to increase the number of units. The parking requirement is still met. The open space goes down a little bit. The unit size is a little bit smaller, but again, it's a way of getting at more units. So I'm going to ask Joey to bring up the Mentimeter question for option B. And it's a very scientific poll. So we're looking for your opinion. Do you like it? Can you live with it? Or you're not too excited about it? So we've had 6 people weigh in quickly. And after this question, you'll be able to provide your answers. So this is specific to scenario B. And again, we're just increasing the density by 10 units. And keeping the parking parameters the same. So not very much changes, but it does allow us to get an additional unit in that scenario. So, and again, the city is looking for guidance. We have to find a way to plan for this, and we're looking for your ideas on where they could consider and take a more detailed look at tweaking or modifying the zoning in certain locations. So I have 21 people weighing in. So we'll just give it, you know, just a little bit more. And you are going to be able to weigh in on C and D separately as well. So it's not picking your favorite. So, okay, well, we seem to be, let's see, we have about 6 liking it, 8 can live with it. So we're about 14 who like it or can live with it, and 8 who aren't too excited about it. So Joey, let's go to the next slide. The next slide is to give us your open-ended comments. So, you know, what are your thoughts on these scenarios? And your comment is going to scroll on the screen. So everyone will be able to, will get a flavor of all the comments that are being entered. And then we as a team can also download them and sort them and organize them for follow-up. So we have our first comment, someone thought that the open space was too low. And also other thoughts on that there's too much commercial, not enough housing. There's a question about, are the units for sale or rental? Al, if you could answer that. I'm not sure if it matters, but if you could confirm that.
Yeah, we didn't determine whether they were for sale or rental, just units.
Hey, Joan, sorry, I think your microphone might have gotten muted. Still, it looks like you're still on mute.
Okay,
there we go.
Okay, great. So let's see. So some of you are concerned about the loss of open space. And then for others, the height's too low. You'd like to see more. That, you know, we need more density. Others concerned about crowding, making a less desirable city. There's concerns that there's too much commercial in this scenario, that we need more for workforce housing. A worry about the density bonus. Want to worry about needlessly limiting the number of units by artificially limiting height. We have larger unit sizes here are nice and great for larger households, but we should build higher to get more units. We have comments, I'm okay with less open space and less commercial. Let's see, density around Laurel makes sense, but the comment about parking spaces is interesting. If there are spaces, it drives the price up, but no parking. where do people park? It's regrettable that we're not making the most out of available space here. We're leaving too many homes on the table. And then another comment, the height is perfect for being near single family homes. More heights means more fight with neighbors. Okay, well, I think I've read off most of the comments. So thank you for your feedback on scenario B. And now we're going to go back to, we're going to take a look at back at the scenario, and this is scenario C. So just to review, and let's see, I do have a comment from Ellen that Menti isn't working for her and she likes scenario B. And so I'm going to ask Joey to resend the Mentimeter link because it looks like one or two people need to be able to try it again. So hopefully you'll be able to get on the Mentimeter. So now we're going to go with scenario C. So again, this is one where we're going up in height, going up in the dwelling units per acre. We're increasing that by 10. So we're up to 40 dwelling units per acre. It does allow, it does allow us to increase the number of units. And we also, in this scenario, we're meeting the parking requirements with podium parking. And Al, could you explain one more time what podium parking is?
Sure. So podium parking is parking that's at grade and it's underneath the building. So it's between the top of the ground and the first floor of the apartments or condominiums. So it's just underneath the building above grade parking versus something that's underground.
Okay, great. Thank you, Al. So again, we're meeting our parking requirement. We have a different configuration of units. They're a little bit smaller, but we're able to get more units in. So now we're going to ask you your opinion on scenario C, and it's going to be the same set of comments followed by the open-ended comment question. So Joey, if you want to bring up the Mentimeter, that would be great. And I'm glad to hear, Ellen, it's working for you now. So hopefully folks are able to participate in the Mentimeter. Okay, we have about 10 folks. Okay, well, great. We're up to, let's see, 20. And I think last time we had a little over 25 at least, maybe even more. Okay, and again, a little bit of feedback on the format and the tool. And again, we're just trying to change how we get participation, and we'll take the feedback we've received. Let's see, so just a few more folks. What's your level of support for scenario C? Do you like it? Can you live with it, or you're not too excited about it? Okay, so scenario C, there seems to be more participants who like it and can live with it. So we have 11, 8, and 5. And now we'll go to the open-ended question where you can share your comments on scenario C. So any thoughts on helping us understand what you like about this scenario? And for those of you who weren't excited about it, what you didn't like about that format or about that scenario. Okay, so we'll just give folks a minute to type or so. Okay, so in this scenario, we have someone who likes the additional open space and the reduced commercial space. We have a participant who would like enough data to make more informed comments. People liking that it allows for more units. I'm glad that there are more homes, but again, some comments about the homes being smaller, 1,200 square feet not being realistic for families. We have someone who likes that the height is not increased and that more units can fit in the space. Other comments, we can still go higher. Good design can preserve neighbor privacy. A lot should be all open space and building. Parking should be below grade. We need more housing. Housing density is good. Use daylight planes to step massing away from single family development. We have someone who likes this much better than B, better open space, more units with same height. They like this much better than A and B in terms of density and less commercial space. Again, more comments on less commercial space being better. And this one combines commercial and residential, but not sure if families would want to live on the first floor of Laurel. Comment about not thinking we need that much commercial, and thinking that 34 feet is too short. We have concerns about the real height being 72 with a density bonus. They like, someone likes that this scenario prioritizes homes. More units are also great, but the building should be taller. We can eliminate parking here to create more homes. Okay, keeping height low, agreeing to build higher. Then just a concern, the problem with the scenario is that the unit size is assumed smaller. And then we're staying with our current 50-foot max. Anyhow, there is, so that's kind of the flavor of the different comments that we have heard. Okay, so how about if we go to scenario D? So again, the same process. I'm going to take you back to our chart. And this is the last of the polling questions here on this set. So we're up to a density, we have 550 dwelling units per acre. So we've increased the density a little higher. And this allows us to get even more units. And the commercial space has been reduced to 0. We also have our open space. We have an increased number for open space. We have our parking. And then in this scenario, the units are a little bit smaller. They're at 1,000 square feet, but we're able to get 28 units in this scenario. So again, with that in mind, I'm going to ask Joey to take us to Mentimeter, and we'll do our initial pulse to find out if you like it, you can live with it, or if you're not too thrilled with it. Okay, so we have about 18 people weighing in, a few more folks coming in on scenario D. Okay, and we'll just wait a little bit more for people to weigh in. So right now we have 7 who like it, 10 who can live with it, and 7 who are not too excited about it. And let's see, so we've had 24 people weigh in. And so with that, we're going to go to the open-ended comments and ask you to give us an idea of your level of support, what informed your decision. So I'll give folks just a minute to type and get their comments up on the screen so everyone can see them. We'll see who the fastest typist is for scenario D. Okay, so we have a question about how can this create a mixed-use neighborhood with no commercial space? Al, I don't know if you want to respond to that. And then we have some additional comments about needing commercial on the ground floor. Underground parking would allow for more housing. They would support, this person would support higher building heights if there were at least 25 to 30% low-income housing included. They thought, person thought this was the best of 4 plans, but with this many units, the 1.5 parking spaces will create severe parking problems. We have someone who likes the higher density while maintaining a nice amount of open space. They're okay with no commercial space and the maximizing of housing in this scenario. We have a comment about the unit square footage being a little small for a family of 3 to 4. Another comment about the size of the units being small. Comment, you know, again, folks concerned about the size of the units. And And just a comment, I don't get why adjacent residents get so much control over what's built. Then a comment about having mixed use will add both housing and commerce. This plan does not include commercial. I'd support higher building heights if there were more BMR housing in the development. And then a comment about why not increase the height and the number of floors to get more houses. I'm okay with no commercial and with even less open space. Another agreement that this would create severe parking. And then we have 1,000 square feet is nice for a 2-bedroom. Just a comment inquiring about the number of developers participating in the meeting. I'm sorry, we don't have that information. Let's see, do we want to encourage more families? Smaller unit size will reduce families moving in. And then great to prioritize space for homes, but hoping for more units here and a mix of unit sizes. And then a response, I think, to a question about the adjacent homeowners. Some may have solar panels that will be blocked. And then finally, perhaps we'll have more multifamily quads all throughout the town. Let's see, so, and then another final comment about the unit size should not be regulated. And then want to encourage a mix of uses. Okay, well, thank you for all your comments. And again, anything that comes in, the team will have. So I think I've read most of the comments, but in the interest of time, I would like to keep us moving forward. We have another topic. It's a little less detailed. And I believe we're going to have Lisa Porras walk us through that. So I'm going to take us to that part of the PowerPoint. And Lisa, if you want to speak with us about what's happening with Terminal Way.
Thank you, Joan. Sure. So the next area that we would like to hear from you about concerns a street called Terminal Way. And Terminal Way is located, and I'll show you a map in just a moment, but I just like to introduce the idea for a second. Thank you. Terminal Way is located on the east side. And basically what Terminal Way is an industrial street, but it just so happens to back up right against a single family neighborhoods, the neighborhood, which is, some of you may know, is the Greater East San Carlos neighborhood. And this is an area that we have heard about in our recent conversations as part of the outreach that we've done with this neighborhood group in general. They're sort of in a situation where there's a little bit of mixed use area that is fairly limited, limited so much that so that nothing has happened since 2011. No development proposals have been there. And they're also right next to industrial. So they're a key group that we definitely wanted to reach out to and have a conversation about housing as we began to explore the potentials for more units throughout the city. So we've heard from this group in general about some of the challenges that exist with being right up against an industrial type of operation. And in addition, some of you may know that we are working on a plan for San Carlos's east side, and that is known as the East Side Innovation District Vision Plan. And through those conversations, community workshops, and stakeholder outreach meetings, we have also heard that Terminal Way sort of presents itself and could possibly lend itself to having something different occur at some point in the future. So like every long-range plan, we start with an idea, we explore the potential for what places can become. So this is why we're bringing it up to you this evening so we can talk about it. So we can go to the next slide and just sort of jump right in. So one of the things that we started to consider is that, well, a lot of people are talking about, this being a buffer area, that, there's a need to have some sort of buffer between the single family homes, which are shown in yellow, and the industrial uses, which are shown in light blue. So Terminal Way, as you can see right here on this slide, the north side of it is essentially oriented to the left as you look at this map, which is shown in the hatched area. So north is shown in hatched, and the south side of Terminal Way is all shown in blue, just to sort of orient you. And so there's been ideas and talk about, a transition zone. Could there be a buffer between single family uses and these industrial areas? So as we start to talk about potentials for looking at housing and what might be a desired change at some point in the future, what would the community feel about introducing housing into this area? So as we thought about that, we automatically recognize, because we just talked about it, mixed use next to single family. So if we were to introduce housing to some portion of Terminal Way in the future, we recognize that the north side would likely have some sort of restrictions on heights and setbacks and maybe even ground floor uses due to the fact that they're adjacent to single family residents. We don't know what that mix is yet. Again, tonight is just really like a soft introduction to begin exploring that to you. And we'll probably hear about this more at the East Side workshop as well. So this is just the beginning. I just want to make sure everyone is clear on that. If we look at the parcels on the south side, which is to the right of Terminal Way where the lettering is, you will see that these parcels are a little bit deeper, actually quite deeper than the ones on the left side of Terminal Way. And when there's a deeper lot, it generally makes it easier to get more housing built in that area. So this is what we want to talk to you about is, what are the possibilities and what do you think about this? So we're just going to go through, we're going to talk about the north side and we're going to talk about the south side. And then we're going to get some input from all of you on, what do you think about the north side and what do you think about the south side? So if we can go to the next slide. So some of the potential housing types that could be inserted or introduced into the area could be live work. And live work is a building type where there is a ground floor services or some sort of, business services, and the floors above consist of the living area. And usually when you see these in their most traditional form, it's kind of like the shopkeeper's unit. And if Joan or Lisa or Al have any other examples, in my mind, I think of the shopkeeper's unit where you have a shopkeeper on the ground floor and then, they live right above the shop. So this might be an interesting idea where there's a lot of small business operators right now, but it would provide them with an opportunity to live above the business that they reside over. There's that option. Another option could be, residential over retail or some type of services in that area. We know uses are a critical piece of this conversation, because we certainly want to consider how uses can be most compatible with one another. We don't want to have, like some sort of industrial use that has a lot of noise right next to a single family home. This would not be a desirable situation for anyone, because everyone would be a little bit, trying to always work it out, and it's hard to do. So uses are definitely an important piece of this conversation. Or, the last bullet says both. Maybe there are options to do live work, and maybe there are opportunities to have, mixed use residential over some sort of ground floor service or retail on the north side. And then likewise, going to the south side, we also, and I just want to jump to this next slide, just to let you know, this is the extent. So this is really a soft introduction. We're not asking about specifics, although if you do have specifics that you'd like to share, we're certainly going to provide the same opportunity to do that with the Mentimeter that we just looked at. So on the south side, what might be desirable over there, or maybe it's something else that you would like to tell us about. But certainly we can take a fine, kind of like a fine-grained approach to this area based upon the input that we receive from you tonight. So maybe what we can do, and that's the extent of the slides. Again, this is a soft introduction. This is an opportunity to see what might be possible. Certainly, this is not the silver bullet in terms of meeting our RHNA, but we don't want to leave anything off the table, because meeting the RHNA, which our regional housing needs allocation number of 2735 new homes, plus the 20% buffer units, is going to be challenging. And we realize that. So that's why we had these conversations about what might be desirable in the MUN. What could we change there to maximize housing? And so we also want to have this conversation with you tonight about Terminal Way. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Joan, who can kind of walk us through the north side and the south side using Mentimeter and I think the open-ended comment component.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So you're going to see a Mentimeter question that asks for your initial opinion about potential housing types. We're going to start with the north side, and then we're going to have a similar question for the south side. You'll get a polling question, and then it'll be followed by an open-ended question so that you can add some comments. I think there have been a few comments that have come in through the chat already. I also realized that we did not include none or neither. So if that is your choice, please put that in the open-ended comments. So that was an oversight on our part. So I'm going to ask Joey to bring up the next, the Mentimeter again. He's put it back in the chat in case anyone needs it. So we're thinking about potential housing types north side of Terminal Way. Would you consider? And again, this is an early introduction of the concept. So this is not a vote that ensures this will happen, but it's the first step at suggesting the city explore this a little bit further. So we have 19 people weighing in, 2 with live work, 2 with residential over retail, and then we have 15 who are considering both. Okay, so Joey, why don't you take us to the open-ended question? Where, let's see, okay, so we'll do the south side of Terminal Way. And again, is that, do you want to do live work, residential over retail, or both? And again, we seem to have an opportunity for people to consider both. So this is kind of a soft introduction to open up the conversation. So there seems to be some receptivity with the people who are participating tonight, and there's a few additional comments coming in through the chat. And then Joey, do we have our open-ended question for Terminal Way? And which one is this? This is specific to any additional comments that you have. So thinking about north side, so we do have folks, a couple of folks who are not in favor or would not like the city to explore it. And so we'll give folks a little bit of time to weigh in here. And again, there were a few comments in the chat, but then also if anyone else wants to add some additional ideas about what should be considered. So we have a comment on the north side, keep it residential only. Just a question of how it fits into the greater innovation project. And I think this is at the very early stage of that conversation. I don't know, Lisa, if you want to say anything about the innovation process and how this question might inform that.
Sure, I can jump in here. And Al is also here tonight as well, and he can add to anything that I following my response to that. So if you go to www.sancarlosinnovation.org, and I'll put that in the chat in just a moment, the East Side Innovation District Vision Plan is a project that just started at the beginning of this year, and it will be finished by September of this year. So it's a 9-month project, and it's an exercise to really look at the potential to weave together and get maximum value out a number of, at least 10 different projects. I think it's 8 or 10 different projects that are currently being proposed in that area. A lot of these projects consist of life science and biotechnology, and we have a significant amount of interest to really, transform the area. So rather than just a bunch of separate buildings going up on individual parcels, is there an opportunity to look at kind of like a larger vision for the area where we can really sort of improve the public realm, which is, you know, essentially the right of way. It's the sidewalk experience, the roads, you know, potential for bike lanes, for potential for more circulation, better circulation and connectivity within and throughout this particular area that we're looking at. So as we had, you know, one community workshop at the, I think it was March 24th, we started to hear about, you know, the potential for, you know, some of these areas, and started to really, especially, excuse me, the Terminal Way area, and what possibilities could sort of be planted there, ideas for the future, how we can make a better kind of existence or situation for the residents that currently live in the east side as they are adjacent to whatever is occurring in the industrial areas. So I'll stop there and see if Al wants to add anything, but essentially this is where the idea of Terminal Way kind of as a sub area, this really unique area with a lot of probably independently owned individual small parcels much smaller than in other areas of that East Side study area are existing. It's sort of really unique and different. So what are some of the possibilities for this area?
Yeah. And Al, before you, if you're going to add anything, Lisa, if you could remind folks when the next Eastside Visioning meeting is. I believe there's one coming up, and that's going to be a direct opportunity for residents to be able to engage in that conversation.
Right. The next workshop for the Eastside Innovation District Vision Plan project is going to be on Wednesday, June 9th. And it's also a 6 to 8 p.m. workshop. So if any of you are interested and want to kind of join in and talk about that, and we certainly encourage you to do so, you know, please go to www.sancarlosinnovation.org and you can sign up there, and I'll put the link in the chat right now.
Yes, and there's a comment in the chat about, is there a plan to look at adding residential to other areas in the east side? And I think that would be a good meeting to attend to learn how those topics will be discussed.
Joan, can I ask a question? Are we going to have any time to just ask general questions like we did in the other area?
I think we can do that now. I think we've gotten a few comments and questions here. We appreciate the feedback that people are giving us, and we've just been scrolling so that people could read them as we're going through. We do want to take some follow-up questions, and then we'll also have public comment as well. So let's see. And again, I just want to give folks a chance to read some of the comments. We're getting some very thoughtful input and just a wide variety of concerns. And the project team will be reading through these. And I believe, as Lisa said, this is kind of a soft opening to start talking about this. So for questions, let me see, do I have any hands raised? And we'll see about taking some questions. So if you'd like to ask any general questions. So we had a Dawn, your hand went up and it went back down again. So if you'd like to ask a question, we can take you off of mute. Yes. Okay, Dawn, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So I know parking is a really big concern and I'm definitely for it. But I didn't know if San Carlos owns the area that is adjacent to the train tracks, and was wondering if there was a way for us to improve public parking in some areas so that maybe it's more feasible for some of these dwellings that are close to El Camino to decrease their parking, or possibly consider some type of secured bike storage with all the electrical bikes going on. If you were to put, you know, 6 or 8 electrical bike secure storage places, that equals a lot of cars that we could get off of the road and increase our secure storage for bikes.
I think I can try that one. The area around the train station is what I think you're referring to with the parking lot area in next to the new buildings, the new commercial buildings there by the historic depot. And that area is not owned by the city of San Carlos. It's owned and run by the Samtrans Caltrain Joint Powers Group. And they intend to put bicycle storage, more bike storage in there, enclosed bike storage and other things. They just haven't done it yet, but I know they're planning to do that, as I've seen some plans in that area. But the city doesn't have any jurisdiction to control what they do with that parking area.
Okay, thanks, Al. Let's see, we have another hand raised, and that's Debbie. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. This is more of a comment than a question, but with sea level rise and climate change, adding a lot of buildings down in the East San Carlos district really seems to make that more vulnerable to flooding than it would be now. So is there a plan to consider the environmental impact so that there aren't below grade parking lots or things like that that would be subject to flooding? Because it is kind of alarming that they're biotech labs. We don't know what kind of hazardous materials are in those labs, yet it is in an area where streets already flood when we're not in a drought. Thank you.
So yes, those development projects will be required to make their buildings so that they're protected from floodwaters. And also, I mean, they want to do the same thing. I mean, they're investing millions and millions of dollars into their buildings, and they don't want it, to lose their investment to floodwaters in the future. So we do require them to raise up floor plates, and if they do subterranean parking, they have to do special design techniques so that they don't flood and things like that. So yes, that will be addressed for any new development in the area.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Al, and there's a quick question. I have another hand, but in the chat there was a question about if we meet our requirements, then can we not worry about the new state legislation being proposed, or could these bills add even more demands? So if you could speak to the kind of the tone and tenor of the state legislation and how it might impact the city, even if we meet our RHNA goals.
I think it's a first step for the city. We have to do it. So will it protect us? To some extent, I believe that we will be held in good stead by the state of California if we are able to meet our RHNA goals. We will be protected from any negative consequences as a result of not doing that. And we know that the governor and others in the state, if you don't meet your RHNA, they're saying there will be consequences for that. There is other legislation that doesn't have to do with RHNA, but it is housing related. And there's literally dozens of bills at the state of California in various stages of review. And some of them are fairly significant in terms of how they affect cities and housing, and mostly in the area of streamlining development review and allowing for more housing in our communities. So to some extent, yes. To some extent, it remains to be seen. And someone mentioned SB 9 and SB 10 in the comments. I guess that was Debbie. She's right. Take a look at the language for those two. They, are starting to erode away at things that we do with zoning and policy in San Carlos and other cities.
Okay, thanks, Al. We have a hand up from Dimitri, and just a reminder, we also have the public comment period. So question, Dimitri, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's not so much a question as a comment. I think it's great that the city's thinking about how to deal with terminal and the immediate adjacency between people's homes and their backyards and incompatible use, which is the current issue that we have. So I think this is a really good first step. I think we should, given the amount of development that's being considered on the east side, I would encourage people to realize that a terminal is not the only opportunity to put housing on the east side. And it may actually be more appropriate to put higher density housing closer to the biotech campuses further south. So that's all I had to say.
Okay, thank you, Dimitri. There's a question in the chat from Brittany. She's asking about, is the city considering zoning beyond just the minimum needed to meet the RHNA numbers? The spirit of the law is to solve our extreme affordability crisis. So I think that's the context her question is asked in, and she has some additional comments there.
Yeah, so two answers. One, we're trying to, I think at the beginning, we talked about having a buffer in terms of the minimum requirement of 20% over the RHNA. So we're going to look at zoning for that. And then also for below market rate housing or workforce housing, the city is working to see how we can create more opportunities for workforce housing in San Carlos. We have what we call a below market rate ordinance that requires new market rate housing that's being developed to include workforce housing and at different affordability levels in those development projects. So we're working on that now. We've got one already. We've got this ordinance. We're looking at adjustments. And the city is also, the city council is investing in the creation of new units in our with its own affordable housing dollars, like at 817 Walnut, where we have a new 24 unit BR project. And then now on Cherry, the council is looking at developing 30 units of affordable housing for families in that location. So we're kind of doing a bunch of different approaches to increase our workforce housing.
And Al, there's a question, why can't we require developers to have a 25% BMR requirement?
You know, that's a great question. And so we look at the numbers, and what we do is we look at construction costs, land costs, timing, and loans, and how does we try and look at it from the way a developer would look at it, and then a way that the city looks at it. And we talk to affordable housing developers too. And so at some point, there's sort of a balance where a city can say, okay, 15% is our number, and out of that 15%, 10% has to be at the moderate level, and 5% has to be at the low income level, right? So, and that works. We know from our economic analysis, feasibility analysis, that a developer can still make a little profit, and the building will get developed with that 15%. At 20%, we know that it kind of works on the apartment side, but it's starting to the for sale condo side, it might not work. So at a certain point, a certain percentage that cities require, it's not just the percentage, but also how many of those units are low income or medium or very low income units. It doesn't work. And so if the city says, I want 25% at this unit mix, nothing will get built. In fact, you won't even get market rate units because you've priced yourself out of the market. And so that's what we're constantly looking at. And we're talking to the developers and the economists about what is the right balance for our city and what really works. Hopefully that helps to answer the question.
Okay. And then there was just a comment about ADUs being a significant part of the mix of housing in the city. So what's the picture, the city's picture on ADUs look like?
Lisa?
Sure, I can answer that question. So the picture of ADUs looks really, really promising. And this is not just, just a general remark, but it's a remark based upon our actual experience and what we're seeing happen with respect to accessory dwelling unit production in San Carlos. So Prior to, let's say, 2016, the city had been receiving on average maybe 4 to 7, proposals to construct ADUs throughout San Carlos. Basically just 4 or 7 applications per year. Since some of the new housing bills, so we were just talking about housing bills, constantly being introduced, constantly looking at ways to facilitate the production of housing. When in 2016, a series of new laws concerning accessory dwelling unit production were passed to make it easier. And then those additional housing laws have come forth since then to make it even more easy to build ADUs. We've seen ADU production pretty much, more than double, where now we're getting anywhere between 35 to 40 applications per year. So one of the things that we're going to need to look at, and Lisa Brownfield with MIG mentioned this at the beginning of our discussion tonight, was, what will the state allow us to count as far as those ADUs? Now, certainly when an ADU gets built, it is counted towards the RHNA, but most of the time it's counted as a market rate unit because we don't, have a mechanism to deed restrict those to be below market rate units. But based upon, some factual data that could be collected, there could be a percentage of those that can count towards below market rate RHNA category or housing needs category, the allocation for below market rate housing units. So I would say that they're definitely a great source, a great potential, given that the majority of the land, residential zone land in San Carlos consists of single family residential. There's definitely, it's never been an easier time to build an ADU than it is now. So a lot of people are doing it, more people are doing it.
And Lisa, can you speak to ADUs being used for Airbnb? Do they still count towards the RHNA if the person is leasing them for short-term rentals? Does the city have anything in place that responds to that?
We have within our zoning ordinance, although it's not directly specified in our zoning ordinance, we have certain regulations or controls based upon our definitions for what's considered as a living unit, which basically we currently don't allow units to be used as short-term rentals. However, like many other cities, we know that some people do, and there's different scenarios for that. Somebody could just rent out, one room, where you go to Airbnb and you rent a private room, versus other types of situations where you're renting the whole house and the whole property. So right now, when we get calls asking if short-term rentals are permitted, the answer is no. That's a conversation that we need to explore, because as more housing units are, being provided and are built in our city, we would desire that those units be used to house a family, a person, and not be used as, at least the whole unit. Someone could choose to rent a room. And that would have to be a conversation about that. But certainly if you're using a whole unit as an Airbnb or short-term rental, then it really takes away a housing opportunity for someone to live on a long-term basis.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So I've gotten all the hands that have been raised. There's a few comments related to Airbnbs and some people who have thoughts about them, and the panel can receive those. It's just 8 o'clock, but we do want to make sure that we have time for public comment. So if there's anyone who wants to make public comment, you'll have up to 2 minutes, and we'll just take you off mute. And so I see 2 hands raised. So I'm going to ask Jesse or Joey to pull up the clock, and we'll get started with our first commenter. So we have Karen Tusman, if you want to take yourself off mute and share your comments. Okay, and Karen, I see, okay, you've lowered your hand. So next I have Debbie, if you would like to go ahead and comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to let the entire group know that there's a petition on change.org related to Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10. Senate Bill 9 will mandate 2 units on all zoning now that is single family. Senate Bill 10 would allow up to 10 units if the city council allowed it. The problem is there's no requirement in either one of those bills for mandatory affordable housing. And both of those bills eliminate the requirement for environmental review called CEQA. In San Carlos, we have 4 creeks and we're right next to the bay. So eliminating the environmental review seems particularly burdensome, and the loss of trees and green space is alarming. So please take a look at those bills and provide feedback to the state legislators. It's probably going to pass the Senate, that's Senator Becker, but it will be probably fought out in the Assembly. So to the extent that you can give input about those bills, please work to preserve our single family zoning so that all these discussions we're having about our general plan are not moot. Thank you very much.
Debbie, thank you for your comment. I heard through the chat that Karen is back. She's going to try and take herself off mute. So Karen, you should be able to speak. Please go ahead.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So I really appreciate this presentation and showing how, density is not a 4-letter word. There are ways to get more homes in more places. And I really appreciate the way staff took the time to do that. I think it's really problematic that we are consistently leaving more homes on the table to sort of preemptively appease people who have kind of already won the lottery. They bought a home in this area, many of them quite a while back when it was much more accessible. And it seems like consistently our public mechanisms are being used to prop up home values for folks who have already benefited a lot. I was struck by the comment of sort of what's in it for us as the single family residents around. And I would really urge staff to not let that be the prioritizing factor. We really need to house more people because the people are here. The fact is we're just making them drive from far distances, and our environmental crisis cannot sustain that. And so it's really a question of priority and spirit. I heard a comment like, well, the community doesn't want more density. The community doesn't want more housing. And I really want to push back and say that's not true. There are many of us in the community who live here and want to see others be able to live here too, to cut down commutes, to cut down emissions. And I really hope staff takes that to heart and uses that as a guiding principle in the decisions that we make for planning our housing going forward. And also SB 9 does not require building duplexes. It gives cities a tool. I'm very glad that our senator supported it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Our next commenter is Brittany Baxter.
Hi, thank you so much again for putting this on. I am really excited for RENA. I think it's a great chance for us to dream big and even use those numbers just as a minimum for kind of what we can envision for the future. I look around and, so much of San Carlos was built in the 1950s. And I think housing looks really different for our generation, right? I'm from the late 80s. We're sort of that baby boom following the boomers. And we need housing here for our generation. We have people that want to start families and contribute to the community. And I don't think it should be limited to those of us who are just, frankly, extremely wealthy. So I would, I would encourage the city to dream so big that we're not so worried about individual units being Airbnbs or, how much money the city can kind of use to fund affordable housing. I know our budget is very tight here. We have kind of a small tax base because a lot of houses are subsidized, thanks to Prop 13. So, if we can dream big, create homes for a lot more people to join the community, pay taxes, contribute, I think that's really fantastic. I would also encourage us to just kind of let the free market work to create a lot of affordability by creating additional units. The city doesn't have, again, endless money to subsidize affordable developments, neither do developers. But if we create enough abundance, I think we'll be really excited by the results. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Brittany. Brittany will be followed by Sonia Elkis. If you please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to say that I love the idea of 2 to 3 to 4 family homes. When I lived in Germany, they were very much the norm, and I loved having a family upstairs or the family downstairs. I loved that there were more playmates for kids. I love that you could walk next door for a playmate. I feel like that when you have more density, somewhat more density, you get, you have more future friends to choose from. You get your running partners right next door. You get your cups of sugar borrowed. There's, to me, a lot to be said for a slightly bigger community. But in general, what I really wish is that homes were, built not so that you have a giant house for one family and then a tiny little unit for, somebody else, but that they were a little bit more equally shared, more duplex style. I think, the way people live now, we have grandparents hopefully living with us, or we have, the elderly parents or grown children, or, special needs relatives. And even just plain the rate of divorce being 50%, I think that should tell us that we need at least 2 homes on each property, because it's not good odds for kids. So, I think there's a whole lot of reasons to increase density somewhat. I am very worried about lots of density, because of I don't think we've solved our public transportation issues, or our cars parked on streets and no bike lanes. And I'm worried about figuring out how to get cars, but I love the people. I just think we haven't figured out cars and public transportation yet. So those are some of my concerns and thoughts. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you, Sonia. And the next hand, and I believe it's the final hand we have, is Dimitri.
Yes, hi. Yeah, a couple of comments. So I think it is, I think everyone is thinking about ways that we can increase density, but doing it in a way that doesn't disproportionately affect specific communities, specifically the East Side. And we want to do it in an intelligent way where we actually are building more housing units. And one of the things I'm concerned about is people mentioning, oh, let the free market determine how things are going to work. And it's pretty clear that when you upzone, you increase the value of the land, and the value of the land then is reflected in the cost of the units. So you're not actually getting any affordable housing units. So I kind of feel that that's a bit of a straw man. It's an argument that hasn't borne out in fact by saying let the free market decide. The free market has decided, and it means way more expensive units and not enough affordable housing. So I think that's a very, very important factor to point out. I also think that folks do need to be considerate of the fact that many of us on the East Side are living in quite small homes. I raised a family of 4 in a 1,000 square foot home. So we're actually, in a sense, the folks who've been leading the way and living in smaller homes and living in smaller lots, and then to disproportionately affect the East Side, I don't think is a great way to do it. But there are opportunities to have increased density on the East Side with the commercial developments that are being proposed, and do it in an intelligent fashion where it kind of benefits everyone. So I think that, we really need to put our heads together and not play sides here to say, oh, you guys have something, we don't, and pit odds. Let's work on being a collaborative and cooperative instead of hurling accusations. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Dimitri. I think you're the last hand in the queue for public comment. So I'm just going to go back to our PowerPoint. We just have just a quick timeline review. So Lisa Brownfield, the MIG project manager, if you could go through this very quickly, and then Lisa Porras will give us our next steps and closing remarks. So Lisa?
Yes, certainly. So right now, as you can see in this spring and summer right now, we're still in the iterative process of thinking about what changes can be made to the zoning and other regulations, and what are the other options to consider for expanding our housing stock. And then we anticipate in the winter that we're going to be drafting the elements and the zoning amendments, and then going through the environmental review process and some other processes with Planning Commission and City Council consideration in the summer, fall, with adoption being prior to January 2023 deadline.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And let's see. So next, Lisa Porras, do you want to bring us on home? And you're on mute.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. So I just wanted to quickly kind of go through some of the next steps so everyone can sort of anticipate where we're heading after this, because there was a lot of good input received. So we're definitely going to be taking all of that into consideration as we look at the solutions going forward. One of the areas that we haven't discussed yet, and I think it was mentioned in this chat, was El Camino Real and the potential to build additional homes along El Camino Real, kind of looking at the same zoning modifications. You know, what would it mean to increase density? What would it mean to increase height and adjust parking and open space modifications? So we're currently working on that, and we're going to be bringing that forward to you to have a more focused discussion on that area. Certainly it's in a different context, and there's definitely going to be different sentiments about what could, you know, potential bring along El Camino Real. So following that, we're going to be refining a lot of the development regulations, or essentially these zoning standards for all of the mixed use and multifamily zoning districts. As we mentioned before, a lot of the input we received can be transferable to other areas and zones within the city. We will be taking a look at the modifications, however they are going to sort of gel and bubble to the surface to make sure that they are feasible from a development standpoint. This was discussed tonight, you know, in different contexts, certainly looking at BMR requirements and making sure that, you know, they're feasible and that we're not introducing some sort of zoning standard that is going to present an inadvertent challenge. We also need to make sure that the sites that we have in San Carlos are suitable to the state. At the beginning of this process, I think it might have been in our first workshop, we talked about the fact that the state actually plays a hand in determining whether the sites that we have in San Carlos are actually suitable to meet our regional housing needs allocation. So we want to make sure that whatever we come up with, they're suitable from the community's perspective, you know, feasible to developers, and that meets the needs of the state. And then lastly, we would tie all of that together in terms of meeting the 2735 plus the 547 buffer units. So that's essentially what we are going to be working on in the next steps, and we'll be making sure to communicate with you along the way through our email distribution list. So if you haven't signed up for that, we certainly encourage you to go to the project website, again, sancarlos2040.org, and sign up so that you can receive emails. So with that, on behalf of the whole team, I just really thank you all for taking the time tonight and getting through with us on this conversation. I know it's not always easy to do through Zoom, but I think everyone's getting by and doing a good job. So thank you once again.
Okay, thank you, Lisa and Al and Lisa Brownfield, and also Joey and Jesse for keeping the Zoom going. Thanks for all of your input. Again, we use the tools. We'll download all the information. There'll be a recording of tonight's meeting that will be posted on the website probably sometime next week. And with that, we're officially adjourned. So we appreciate the extra time that you have given us this evening, and thank you very much.